Hello, welcome again to my channel. In the last video, we talked about the Caroline age. Today, we are going to start with the literature of Enlightenment. And that is the post 1700 period. So, what was Enlightenment period? What were the concerns of the Enlightenment period? Who were the main writers of those age? How was the drama during the Enlightenment period? What was the fiction written in that period? We'll be talking about that in brief, and we'll be covering all those things in this video. The basic intellectual concerns of the 18th century, the Enlightenment period, was reason, rationality, empiricism, and scienticism. Now, pamphlets became a very basic form of writing which was enjoyed by the people of that particular era. Two main pamphlets, very popular pamphlets, were the Tatler and the Spectator. The Tatler and Spectator, they were written by the joint efforts of Richard Steele and Joseph Addison. The Tatler, it talked about the social commentary, satirized the follies of the upper class and women. Their obsession with wealth and absence of benevolence was talked about in the Tatler. Now, Spectator, it was essentially a document of common life in London, and from fashion and theatre it was being talked about. Also it talked about the trade and morality. Travel became a very enjoyable form of writing which was written at a very wider scale and read at a wider scale. Tourism and travel became a very big business and pastime during the 18th century. Another very famous concept that came during the 18th century was Orientalism, which was coined by Edward Said. Travel and tourism increased during the Enlightenment period. With this came the concept of Orientalism, which was coined by Edward Said. Now, Orientalism came because of the increased travel that led to the increased interest in other cultures, and people wanted to know more about the other countries, the untraveled, the undiscovered countries. This led to translation, interpretation, codification, and historiographies into India and other nations. Thus, a close link was established between travel, exploration, trade, and colonialism during the Enlightenment era. Now, Eliza Haywood, she wrote The Female Spectator, and it was as a response to Addison and Steele's periodical essay. Another very famous writer of the Enlightenment era was Daniel Defoe. His essays and other prose, they were special commentaries on the 18th century. He wrote Inquiry into the Occasional Conformity of Dissenters, Shortest Way with Dissenter, and it was basically a major attack on Parliament. Now, Jonathan Swift's pamphlets also became very famous. One of a very popular pamphlet was A Modest Proposal. Now, it was written for preventing children of poor people from being a burthen to their parents or country. It was basically a criticism of England's treatment of Ireland. Another important periodical essay that was written, it was the Drapier's Letters. Here, Swift attacked the English policy of using a debased copper coin for their own benefit, and it was against the Irish interest. Another famous writer was Edmund Burke. He was a statesman and philosopher. He was known for his famous 1786 impeachment speech against Warren Hastings, who was then the first Governor General of British India. Now, Dr. Samuel Johnson, he was a maker of the Great Dictionary, which came out in 1755, and he was an extraordinary figure of the Augustan age. He wrote The Vanity of Human Wishes, Lives of English Poets, which was widely read and appreciated by the readers. Another important names of the Augustan age writers were Philip Stanhope, Gilbert White, David Hume, Oliver Goldsmith. Now, let's talk about the features of the 18th century. A lot of emphasis was put on sentiments and manners. Satiric exploration of human follies and vices were being discussed. Bildungsroman narrative was being talked about in their writings. Origins of a Gothic sensibility derived from medievalism, so writers were also taking inspiration from the medieval writing. Picaresque tradition was prevalent in that era. It basically talked about rags to riches narrative. Social commentaries were popular that discussed virtues and moral feelings. Novel of sentiment and sensibility also came into being. It talked about the promise of domestic bliss and good life in heaven, which was rewarded to a virtuous woman. It was basically revolving around a domestic theme. Now, features of Augustan poetry. It was satiric, graveyard school, obsessed with decay and death, highly self-conscious, crafted metrical but used simple, unassuming language. A sense of humanism In writings of Goldsmith, Wartons and Gray appear to the readers. Classical authors and learning figured in the works of Neoclassicism. So again, as I told just a few minutes back, Neoclassicism was prevailing in that era. It was nothing but taking inspiration from the medieval writing, taking inspiration from the classical writers. Emphasis was on form. Feature of ancient art was given a lot of emphasis. Now, Alexander Pope, he was a very, very important poet of the Augustan age. He wrote The Rape of the Lock, which was a mock heroic epic. It parodied epic poetry. Pope also edited the works of Homer and Shakespeare. Now, what was Graveyard School of Poetry? It was covered with death, decay, and mourning. The famous writers of the Graveyard School of Poetry were Edward Young, Thomas Parnell, and Robert Blair. They created dark, brooding atmosphere in their poetry. This kind of poem explored the darker side of human psyche and anticipated Gothic novel. Now, what were the features of the Augustan drama? It was again satiric in nature, sentimental comedy. More emphasis was put on the plot, wit, and also the writers, they were very, very careful while writing drama, poetry, or fiction because of the coming of the Licensing Act of 1737 that we talked about in the last. So here we come to the end of this video. I hope this video would help you. I tried covering everything under the Enlightenment era in brief, which is going to help you whenever you're going to read any of the work which was written during the Enlightenment era. So thank you for being with me. Let's see you in the next video. Thank you.